The farmers and the producers and the value chains we work with, they're focused generally within a regional system, focused at a watershed level, and they're trying to integrate the elements of production, processing, and end sales. They have real commitment to human health, soil health, ecological health, which results in nutritious food that people want and there's demand for. And so you find that the ecological and economic are symbiotic if you're able to get the value out of your product.
Hello and welcome to the On Land podcast. I'm Louis Wirtz, Editor-in-Chief of On Land, and today I am absolutely thrilled to share with you an interview with Dan Miller. Dan is the founder and CEO of Steward, a regenerative agriculture finance firm. Dan founded Steward to combine his background in finance, real estate, and technology with his passion for agriculture, which stems from his maternal family who've been farming on the eastern shore of Maryland since the 1880s. Dan was previously co-founder, president, and director of Fundrise, the first and largest real estate crowdfunding platform, which has raised over $4 billion from 400,000 investors since inception. Dan received a BS and an MBA from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, and he was born and raised in Washington, D.C., but currently lives in London. Dan Miller, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with an easy one. What is Steward?
So Steward is a financing platform for agriculture and regional food systems. And so we provide credit, we provide loans to agricultural producers, value-added processors, really anything from production, processing, through to end sale. And then we raise the capital online directly from our network of individuals who participate in the loans. And so really what's unique about our model is we've built a kind of direct funder relationship to bring really values-aligned, flexible capital to support the entrepreneurs and agriculture producers who are operating outside of the commodity system.
So before Steward, you founded a real estate investing crowdfunding platform I mentioned called Fundrise. So I wonder, how are the businesses similar? And then why was your second startup specifically focused in agriculture?
Either similar but different, but it's all related. All started the same journey. So I've got agriculture on one side of my family. I mentioned in the intro, my mother's family's been farming on the eastern shore of Maryland since the late 1800s. That diversified farm economy became consolidated ag, the largest broiler chicken producing region in the country. Corn, soy, winter wheat everywhere, and just a full monolith of commodity ag system. And I saw the impact on the Chesapeake Bay watershed and on the rural communities out there. So the agriculture part runs deep within my mother's family and within my kind of personal connection to that watershed and that geography. But I grew up in Washington, D.C. My mom left the farm and my father was in commercial real estate development. So that's the other side of my family, is in commercial real estate development and really building, high impact, non-traditional real estate projects that were really gambles on a belief and often ended up being the right outcome. And so I'd grown up around that type of, forward-thinking, creative development context. And then right when I graduated from college, my brother and I started a real estate business ourselves, kind of spun out of a family enterprise. And we were building neighborhood scale development projects in Washington, D.C. and in neighborhoods that were traditionally ignored, where there was a lot of growth. This is about 2010, a lot of growth, but maybe not well understood by traditional capital. And so enough frustrations with private equity investors led us to build a platform, which became Fundrise, to raise money from local residents, from local people, in the neighborhood and in the state, to invest with us in properties we were developing in that neighborhood. So it became the first real estate crowdfunding platform. We went through a multi-year effort through regulations and an incredible amount of legal work to make that possible. We built the technology in-house as well. And that really is where we were able to trial ideas like, is there demand? Do people want to be able to invest directly in property, but directly into something that has more of a mission and values alignment? And so that was proven through that business. The first deal was $300,000, took 3 months to raise. Now that business, Fundrise, raises $100 million a month, all direct to consumer, no intermediaries, all direct to investor. And so built that technology system and the fundraising model, and really pioneered the regulatory model around some of the new legislation that was being passed and how to broaden who can invest in what. And that's the key restriction, is most investments are limited to high net worth institutional investors. They're not marketed publicly, they're kept privately. And so you have very little access to most businesses. And what I was interested in is, instead of having the limited kind of capital define the business, because there aren't many places to raise capital, can we find capital that supports the concept? And instead of trying to have the concept fit the capital, can we have the capital fit the concept? And so that's always been my idea through Fundrise and now Steward of how do we build a platform where these great entrepreneurs, great projects can tell their story and raise capital on fair terms from people who believe in what they do and want to support it. And so at Fundrise, we really built that model through real estate crowdfunding. But even before Fundrise was launched, I got to know a chef named Spike Jurdy in the Mid-Atlantic watershed, really a pioneer of regional direct sourcing from over 150 producers in the watershed. So got to know him, loved his restaurants, loved his food. And then I met the producers he was buying from, amazing specialty heirloom peppers and unique varieties of things that had been forgotten in the region, making great products, being celebrated. And then you talk to those producers and they complain they can't get any financing. No bank will lend towards fish peppers or these obscure ingredients or value-added products. And so that's really where I saw the gap, which is the consumer demand has shifted. People want to purchase products where they know where they came from. They want a more direct connection with the producer. But the people who are actually producing that product have more availability of capital than normal. And in fact, because most ag financing is driven by policy and the policy supports large scale conventional commodity production, if you're outside of that model, you're really left out in the cold. So on paper, there's unlimited amounts of ag financing, but it's all the same type. It's all just the vanilla commodity production selling to the big supply chain system. But if you're growing non-traditional varieties, you're trying to add value to the product, you're trying to do more direct sales relationships, you're just left out on your own. And so that's really who Steward was built to support, which is, who are the producers grounded within a watershed, committed to the community and health of the land, but also growing and selling products that people want, that there's actual demand for, and supplying that market. And so it's a kind of a strange thing that the ecologically driven agriculture focus is the most market demand oriented type of agriculture, but that's just the world we're in today, which is the policy defines the agriculture instead of the other way around.
Yeah. So you used a term at the beginning when you said outside of the commodity agriculture system, and then Steward's website language and some of the other stuff you've mentioned. It talks about regenerative agriculture. I mean, I wonder if you could. Do you guys have a working definition of sort of what fits in that? How does that? How do you evaluate projects when they come to you that sort of meet your what you're looking for?
It's a good question. So I began working on Steward in 2015, the end of 2015. I think at the time I probably used the term sustainable agriculture. I wasn't even really familiar with the term regenerative. I don't think really anyone was until a few years ago. Then all of a sudden that came up, and at first, okay, that is an empowering term, but then also you now see corporates using the term. And so, we never have had a requirement for third-party certification for our business. It was like, we make the assessment on the business as to their practices as an agricultural operator, but also to who they are as people and their commitment to economic development and growth in the watershed and their commitment to land and soil health. And it's a much broader definition. So we're looking at specific agricultural practices around soil health, around reducing and eliminating synthetics, about rotational grazing and integration of animals and crops, around controlling the value chain to get higher margin to producers, about ensuring that kind of ecological, biological health is happening at the same time that the agricultural business is growing. But what I've found is that the people we work with are so deeply committed to their work and to these projects that I'm not having to convince them about anything. It's more that they found us and are finally have found a funding partner who cares about what they do and doesn't just treat them like a generic commodity. And so I think the differentiation that I have is the farmers and the producers and the value chains we work with, they're focused generally within a regional system, focused at a watershed level, and they're trying to integrate the elements of production, processing, and end sales. They have real commitment to human health, soil health, ecological health, which results in nutritious food that people want and there's demand for. And so you find that the ecological and economic are symbiotic if you're able to get the value out of your product. But in a normal model where you're just selling in the commodity supply chain, it doesn't matter what you do, how you grow your product, you're just getting the weight and the volume sold at a generic price, and you have no control above that. And so it really doesn't incentivize practices of better land stewardship because you're not getting the value for the product. So many of our businesses we're working with are trying to break that stranglehold, conglomerate stranglehold around processing and build a vertically integrated regional system of producer, processor, to end product. So you can start to get better income and margin for producers, but also a direct sourcing, more transparent purchasing on the customer side. And so I find like, yeah, anytime I try to get pigeonholed in a definition, I find the definition gets abused. And so we're very much of like, we have certain things we're looking for, but we're mainly focused on the commitments and the values of the entrepreneur behind the business. And because there's so many sources of funding for conventional ag, we just don't get those applicants, because if you have 2,000 acres of corn and soy, there's a lot of places you can go to get money. There's a lot of different support systems. But if you're, a livestock producer trying to do slaughter processing and value add and direct consumer sales, that's outside the system. And that's something where you're not going to really get support outside of that pure ag processing. So we take a really holistic view of it. And I think that's been to our strength, which is we can quickly adapt and move where we see the opportunities without boxing us in and saying we only do this type of operation in just this way when the market's much bigger. Some of our producers are market garden on a few acres where they're hand weeding and harvesting and selling direct a mile away. That's very easy to have a system where you're fully biological inputs, no synthetics. Others are producers on bigger acreage who are converting practices, who are finally adding some integration of animals, who are getting price premiums on their grains by selling them through specialty mills that are milling them into flour. And so it's just a different solution and different need. But I'm definitely of the belief that the market demand has shifted. Consumers and people want a differentiated product. They want to know where the product comes from. They want as clean a product as possible. And that's what's driving the growth of these enterprises. The policy is kind of stumbling behind it to try to incentivize it, but it's really people that are driving it. And so we're just trying to build more of those links and connections.
So somebody who's who I've met, talked with a few times and read, who's inspired me in this space to ask some of the questions about like why and how these things are going, is a guy named Woody Tash, who founded the Slow Money movement here, and he's just in Boulder, Colorado, just north of me. And slow money is slow food, but the finance side of it. And he's a finance guy. And the idea is, again, slow food uses this similar principle. Like there's not a specific certification you need. Like it's kind of like obscenity. You know it when you see it, right? It's like talk to people and meet them and get a sense of what's motivating them to understand, whether they've got that whole stack of values and that they're going to translate to the eater ultimately, that you're talking about. But one of the things that, the slow money component that I think is really interesting is that so much of the way that that Woody talks about his experience in finance before, and you don't have, like, he came from, he's older than us and had decades of experience in high finance, and he was talking about how fast money moves around the planet and how little consideration that actually allows people to have for the people at the bottom, or who are essentially putting the capital to use. So the idea of slow money is really to talk about building relationship as part of the capital investment process, and it sounds like that's sort of fundamental to Steward's model.
Absolutely, it's a human driven platform. We're relationship focused. We work with people we believe in. We provide them capital where there's access to the market. We have flexibility in how we can design and structure things. It's a return to how finance was done, where everything wasn't commoditized. And I look at commodity ag, commodity finance, they go hand in hand. You need one without the other, where your underwriting models don't look at anything, just acreage and yield and that's it. Whereas we're taking, okay, we believe in this business, we believe in this producer. What do they need to take the next steps? What type of capital and what form? How do we put it together? And then what's key to our model is how we fundraise. We then structure the financing, execute loan documents, and raise the money online through our platform. We sell loan participation, so people are participating in the loan we're making, earning interest in principal as it's paid through. So you have an individual person on our website who reads about the project, learns about it, and provides the funding through our platform. And so you have the human element on the other side. And that's really what differentiates us. If you have the traditional institutional money, but you want to have it go aligned with values, it doesn't work because their barometers return. They have to get it back in 5 to 7 years. That means you have to sell the asset and undermines the whole system. So really built it from the ground up of how do you have that human connection on the capital side. And that's where you have these economically symbiotic beneficial outcomes where you've got, you're earning a return and a yield and interest rate on the loan, but you're also seeing land restored, food created, economic opportunity for the business. And that is not the normal scenario. Normally lending is considered you're at odds with your lender, right? That's not generally a warm relationship. And instead our view is we're an advocate for the producer. We want a producer-centric agricultural model. We also want a producer-centric, human-centric financing model. The structures you mentioned of the kind of funds, aggregating of money, wanting high returns, wanting the money back soon, moving fast, that was the original thing that led to Fundrise and turned me off of institutional capital from the beginning. I went to the Wharton School. Unfortunately, I'm surrounded by that whole world. So I understand how corrupting it is and how much is an expectation of huge returns, huge paydays, and extractive models. If you're going to earn 20% a year, it's generally going to be extractive, that type of return over time. And so what we've done is we've cut out all the middlemen, and we go right to the capital, and they can provide the financing at fairer terms, fair rates, but still get something reasonable. And I think people often forget that the capital that is destroying, the planet, or they think is having the negative impact, is often their own capital. It's a teacher's money goes into a pension fund. California pension fund has an advisor who then puts it with Blackstone. And then they have $400 million with Blackstone, who's then buying apartments, increasing the rents, and making it unaffordable in the place where they're from. And then, what Blackstone needs 20% return, but what's the net money going to that teacher? Probably 6 to 8%. So why don't we just give the 6 to 8% to that person and remove the middle? And so I think people often forget with capital that most of the big aggregated resources are actually retail capital put together, and they're acting like it's their money as the manager, but it's not their money. It's ultimately a person's money. So I think that disintermediated model is fundamental to how we work. It's also fundamental to the producers we work with. How do you get more of a direct sale? How do you build that customer relationship? So it works on both sides. Like, know your producer, know where it comes from, understand the cost of it because of what it takes to produce, but also understand that you can have a fair exchange on return at rates that are reasonable without that more, predatory or just the normal thing at, high returns, exit the business, where even success means you're selling the conglomerate. Like, even if it works out, it's a failure.
Yeah. This reminds me of another thing. And so I want to get into a couple of the projects that you guys have invested in so people can really kind of put some real specifics around what you're thinking. And one of the people who is at the heart of one of the projects I wanted to talk about is Cole Mannix at the heart of the Old Salt Co-op. He used to work with WLA. So I met him because we worked together here. And he and I used to have these great conversations. We still occasionally have these great conversations, but he's busier now and I don't get to get him on Zoom. About the relationship that people often, you kind of hinted at there, that people often forget to appreciate between natural capital, what people are doing when when we're talking about restoring soil health or reintroducing livestock or protecting ecological health, and financial capital. That there actually is a direct relationship between like what financial capital has been derived from natural capital. It didn't just we didn't just make money out of thin air in this way. It has a basis in the fruits of the earth, functionally. And we talked about that a lot. And I think Cole and I did. And what you're talking about in terms of taking out that middleman and sort of trying to reorganize how capital returns are like go through the system and where they end up is in a way trying to get closer to this direct connection between the natural capital resource and the financial capital that we could derive from it. The rate of and a reasonable rate of return to expect the earth to provide, given that all of it is coming from sunlight and photosynthesis.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I one of the first in an internship, actually in high school, I worked for a company that did sustainable forestry investments, and they're mainly doing in Latin America or Sub-Saharan Africa. And it's fascinating to learn is that the tree actually grows in mass 6 to 8% a year. I guess you actually have like value growth that's actually a thing that isn't just like a made up economic number. And then that also is a barometer for me. Okay, maybe returns aren't really ever supposed to be higher than the natural biological growth of a system, because ultimately, if they are, then you're taking something out of the system. And so that was an amazing way to use the natural world as a guidance of like, what are reasonable rates of growth and compounding and return that are sustainable for long term. And it ends up that our interest rates are relatively in that range, that they somewhat mirror those
Mm-hmm.
levels. We almost never do a loan in the double digits because it just ends up being very hard to make it work when you have that sort of interest rate growing. So we always try to say mid single digits, mid to high single digits within a number that the farmer and producer and agricultural business can sustain, but that also compensates the funder for some level of risk. And I think that's been the challenge with this, ecologically driven agriculture is it gets considered, it's not serious. It's just people trying to go back to the land and it's not competitive. They need grant money. They need support. They're not a real business. It's like, no, actually they're serving the demand. They need real resources just like any other business. And so they often get qualified in like a different category because of that moral framework. But if anything, I found businesses like Old Salt, which we're talking about, people want to work for them. People are inspired by that mission. And I've definitely found with Steward, like our team loves what we do. We love to be able to work with these producers, help them navigate financing, bring resources to the table, see the growth of that business, build personal relationships with them. Like that's very meaningful. And so I think it just as an example that you can have economic situations that are beneficial, you can have returns that are symbiotic. It goes counter to the traditional model. And I think that's what we're trying to do, build an alternative credit and financing model that can prove that there is a different way to do it. And we built an alternative financing model custom built for alternative agriculture. They both needed each other. The traditional system's a centralized model and ours is a distributed model, just the same way that the agricultural production would be. So it works hand in hand. So I there's a reason why you said, what's the fit with the producers? Like there's an ethical, moral fit. There's a fit, like a fundamental fit in how we believe the system should work in a more human way, in a more direct way, in a more transparent way. And where they are today is often a function of where the region is and where the markets are and what the opportunities have been, not where they'd like to go. And so that's what I love about this work is I'm helping enable these opportunities with an expertise I have around financing that these producers don't really know or have much of an interest in. And so it's a natural benefit where they're able to get access to resources through our mechanism, but we're also able to support businesses that are kind of fundamental to our premise that really prove the thesis that there is an alternative model that doesn't require, exploitation of land for profit.
Yeah. So tell me about like the kinds of capital needs that these businesses, or let's take Old Salt. Like, what is it that they're trying to do that they need capital for that, Steward is able to step in that would be challenging for them to find elsewhere?
Yeah. So Old Salt, just a little background. I'm sure your readers know, a group of Montana ranchers, multi-generational ranchers came together to combine their individual direct meats program and build for fully vertically integrated system with slaughter, value-added processing, butcher shop, restaurant in downtown Helena. So really trying to break the power of the conglomerate kind of processing system, but also get a higher value for the product to enable land stewardship. And that was really Cole and his family and the other ranching families' driving need, which is we're raising this amazing beef, grass finished on pasture and beautiful landscapes. And then it goes to auction and we get generic price and we get nothing for that, what we've created, which is not just a good story, is a better product at the end of the day. And so the only way to do that is then control the whole product, which is a very ambitious vision to build that integration, but there's no other way to do it other than handling it yourself the whole time. And so I was connected to Cole Mannix, I think 3 years ago now. At that point, they had just opened a burger shop. All they had was, the old Salt Outpost in downtown Helena, which I think they got open for $30K. So it shows you can trial things very cheaply. And we're selling burgers to prove the demand for Montana meat, and a smart way to do it, right? But do people want the product? That's always important. Do people want it? Not just can you grow it, but do people want it? And that obviously had huge demand. And what we were able to help them do was really think about what scale of money do we need and how do we go about building all of this infrastructure that's needed. They had multi-generational family land holdings through their ranching businesses, but Old Salt was a new business that was the post farm all the way to the final sale. And so it was a new startup effective from that point, even if it was backed by established companies. And when they went to a traditional bank to try to get some initial financing for the business, the bank was going to require personal guarantee of the ranch owners on their family ranch land, which was just not something they're going to do. They spent generations stewarding that land to put it up. Even if they see the value of this new business, it's just not of risk they're comfortable with. So one of the key tenets of our lending is we don't require personal guarantees in the loans. We're lending towards the business assets. If we're not comfortable lending a certain amount, we can lend less and find other money elsewhere, equity, grant money. There's always a way to make it work. If you don't have to have everyone's whole assets on the line just to feel comfortable as a lender. It's good to control people, but again, the model is like, what's fair, what can be done. And so that really was the differentiation that had us step in of like, well, why are we needed for esteemed multi-generational ranching families with large land holdings? Is well, that because the banks wouldn't segregate the risk and they wouldn't take that risk. So we ended up providing, I think we've done 6 loans now with Old Salt over the past 3 years. The first one was a loan for them to purchase an existing custom exempt processing facility near the Helena Airport. They purchased that and upgraded that facility. They're now upgrading it to be USDA inspected. We provided a bridge loan for them to buy the real estate. We also provided a bridge loan for a grant they had received. They had a $250K Montana grant to buy that facility, but you have to spend the money before you can apply for their grant reimbursement. So we lent them the $250 that they then submitted for reimbursement and paid us back a month or 2 later. And just shows like these little niches you have to fill in to unlock the money. But then that was representative of the cash they needed for the down payment. So it's kind of like a dual loan to help get that facility built. We then helped them purchase a building in downtown Helena that they've opened, that they bought, renovated, and now opened as the Union, which is their butcher shop, retail sales hub, direct-to-consumer pickup point, steakhouse. That really lets them now showcase the product in a beautiful setting. And then just last year, we helped them purchase 24 acres of land in Silver City, Montana. For 2 years, they'd been searching for a piece of land where they could do slaughter, and it was very hard to permit slaughter of livestock in Montana, which is just crazy to me. But that it just shows how the system, from regulatory perspective, doesn't add up. That you're unable to add value and control the process, but that's how it was. And so they found in Silver City an area where they could build a slaughter facility and processing on an integrated site. So that's now what they're working towards. There'll be additional financing needed to build that out. But when that's up and running, and let's say the next year, they will be able to take the animals from the Old Salt founding ranches through slaughter, through value-added processing, directly to the restaurant or directly into cuts that people can buy as local pickup or ship direct to consumer. And so they'll have finally achieved the nearly impossible of full control all the way through. But it's not just about one ranch. It's about an aggregation of multiple ranches and adding in additional ranchers over time. So it's a platform business. It's an enabling business. They're also processing for other ranchers as needed. And so that's what we found with a lot of these enterprises. One person is willing to take the leap to build what's thought to be a crazy level of investment infrastructure for one enterprise, but that enabling infrastructure allows other people to plug in for a lower marginal cost, which then brings the supply online, which gets the volume to a point where you can cover the cost of the facility, supply wholesale contracts. And now that they're going to be USDA inspected shortly, and when they'll have slaughter, they can then start to fulfill much bigger contracts because they can get everything into the national supply chain from a direct partner ranch. So they're an amazing example of a really, deeply committed founder who had the right relationships and knowledge and experience to do this business, but it didn't fit the normal model for various reasons. It didn't fit the traditional system. And we've worked with them as lending partner, but financial advisor, helping them think about how to raise equity and tapping into grant money. And now they've, have a market leading business and really an example around the world. I know it sounds a bit crazy that just the 3-year-old business in Montana, but we work with a few producers in Australia who are visiting in town, and they actually got to meet Cole and see the model. And they've got a similar issue in Australia of consolidated processing and no access. And so just to see that someone had done this made them realize at home, okay, we can do it. And so much of our work is just setting an example of one producer that does it. And then there's many others who are thinking about it. And that gives them the confidence to step in.
Yeah. And especially when you're thinking about trying to really focus on watershed scale businesses, you need those models that can be replicated in order to scale, like to address the actual level of demand and the need for regenerative agriculture as a alternative to conventional commodity extractive production. So to provide that level of connection across the globe, but also even just like within the West, is super useful value for for a company like Old Salt to create and for a company like Steward to create those connections is really cool. So tell me about another, Old Salt is probably the one I'm most familiar with because like I said, I know Cole. Tell me about another company that's, maybe in the American West where our listeners are based and what their challenge was.
So I definitely, the projects I find most interesting and I'm most passionate about are those watershed scale, regionally integrated models where you've got the producer, processor, and end market all in sync and all transparent. Whether one company owns that whole system or it's shared is more of just, is there a kind of ethical and economic alignment among them? Another business that's a great example we work with, they're called Cairn Spring Mills. They have a flour mill in the Skagit Valley, which is about 2 hours north of Seattle, Washington. It was started by a group of farmers and local economic development officials trying to figure out how to get more value out of rotational grains. They were rotating grains in the Skagit for soil health, but they were losing money on the grain. And so if you're losing money on a crop, it's hard to get people to incentivize to add that to the rotation. And so they came up with the idea of building a mill. They're right near WSU's bread lab. So there was conversations around how do we grow varieties unique to the region, create better value from it. And so they created this system where they use a roller mill to initially crack the wheat berry, and then they use a series of stone mills to grind it down finer. They reincorporate the bran and the germ, and then they sift a little bit of the bran so that it has that light baking quality. So they built this beautiful flour that keeps the traceability of the product direct from farm, that keeps nutritional value by incorporating most of the bran and the germ with the endosperm, but also does a little bit of sifting to allow the baking quality of the rising bread and the kind of the loaf that people expect, but with the nutritional value. And so they're a great example of old technology, through stone mills, but also new technology and new systems and an understanding of consumer demand. And so they now are the sole supplier of flour to some of the best known bakeries in the country, such as Tartine in San Francisco, which, through them and Chad Robertson, the founder of, really, I think, created and helped accelerate the movement towards kind of home baking, naturally fermented loaves. And so they have some of these amazing customers celebrating their product. And so when we met them, it was about 2 years ago, their current mill is humming pretty well. They're not at capacity, but they're almost at 8 million pounds a year, which would be at capacity. They had proven demand. They've almost never lost a customer. They were turning away wholesale accounts because they couldn't take them. And so we came in to help them grow the business. I was surprised they had any trouble with financing because they have a product, they have customers, they have famous customers, but this is where the business began, with a celebrated chef who somehow the producers he was buying from couldn't get financing, even with him explaining the benefits of the product. And so we've done 3 types of financing for Cairn Spring Mills thus far. We've done annual inventory financing. So because of their model, they purchase all the wheat at harvest from their producers. So they buy this year $3 million of wheat in December. That's all at once.
Yeah.
You can imagine for normal business, operational cash is a real challenge. So they were having to fund that from their cash reserves. They didn't have a financing line for that. Making payroll while funding those payments is a real challenge. So we provided $2.5 million last year. This year, about 3.5 of a 1-year grain note where we financed 100% of the purchases of the wheat with a 1-year term fully amortizing. And so over that 12-month period, they mill and sell the wheat and they pay down the loan balance. And that way they're able to finance those annual inventory purchases off balance sheet without it impacting their operational capital and smoothing it out over their sales cycles. So that was a real benefit of like farmers getting paid on time, full amount, the business able to get the inventory they need, but without it draining all the reserves. We also provided equipment financing for Cairn Spring. So we funded a $500K towards a palletizer at their current mill. Just, efficient labor saving device. I think a lot of people think of tech devices as against workers. I think a palletizer is one where workers are very excited to have the back-breaking labor off of their rack. So that just helped them, save some labor, add some better margin, do things a little more efficiently. And that was a 5-year loan fully amortizing. So we made the loan. The interest rate on that just was about, I think, 8.5%. And the loan pays off over 5 years. We give them 6 months before those payments start. So that way they have time to generate the cash flow from that product and then pay it over time. So another example, if we can, design the term and the payment schedule and the interest payments around the the underlying cash generation from the use.
Mm-hmm.
And then where I've spent probably more time on any deal than, of we worked with at Steward over the past year, really 18 months now, has been on the new flour mill they're planning to build. They've selected a site in Northeast Oregon near Pendleton on the Umatilla Tribal Reservation. It's going to be 80 million pound a year mill, 10 times the size of their current mill. They'll buy from about 40,000 acres of producers within Southeast Washington and Eastern Oregon, but all fully traceable, direct producer purchase, stored at a granary at their own mill, milled into the flour, all the way to finished co-packed, bagged flour, and then picked up either by the truckload or by the pallet and sent to all the coastal markets and everything within the watershed of the Pacific Northwest. And so that's going to bring the price point down massively. It's going to get the efficiencies that are really needed to fulfill those wholesale contracts, those institutional, school contracts. And it's going to take, some of their customers may source, 20% of their flour from Cairn Spring, but then the rest from a cheaper source. It's going to get their economics to the point where that customer can just get 100% of their product from Cairn Spring, and they can be competitive on price. So for me, that's going to be a transformational project around kind of moving watershed scale transition of acreage, but also supplying the demand at a price point that it can really get to. And that's a $50 million facility. So it's a substantial facility. We're lending $35 million on that. So we're providing $35 million debt financing. And then we've connected them with the equity investor who's going to be the lead investor at about $12 million of equity. And then they've raised the rest from their own direct relationship. So on that one, we're able to structure the financing, package it together, utilize a few rural incentive programs to lower the cost of capital, make some referrals on the project manager who's managing the permits on the project, to the grant writer who got them $2 million of grant money, to the equity investor who's leading it. We really just put a whole team together to support what was an amazing entrepreneur, an amazing company led by Kevin Morse. But because they just weren't understood, somehow, we're running into issues. But it's just a great example of like an existing business operating for 7 years since 2016 with great customers, with growing sales every year, with good margins, trying to expand, can't get financing. It's like, if that business case can't get financing, then who can? And that's the reality is nobody in the market of alternative agriculture has proper access to financing. It doesn't really matter how big or successful they are. We work with White Oak Pastures as an example. They needed some interim financing last year as they were switching from, Whole Foods and mainly wholesale accounts to direct to consumer. And we stepped in and provided that financing. They've had 20 million of revenue for a decade. They're very well-known national business. Like, they have lots of assets. We ended up funding an existing asset they had that wasn't leveraged. And it's like, I don't understand, it's nice where needed, but if this use case exists, then imagine what's out there. And that's what I think people, until you're in this market, you don't quite understand that the entirety of everything outside the conventional commodity agriculture is not supported properly. And that's really our goal at Steward, is to provide the validation for that market, that it is a financeable market. These are real businesses earning real returns. And then to open up that market and make that the norm, because the only way that we're going to get to real watershed scale, national impact, is to start to get higher volumes through and allow bigger acreage and get pricing to a point where it's more manageable. And that's being led by those entrepreneurs. So Cole Mannix, Kevin Morse, you meet them and it's clear that they're committed to a region, they're committed to a place, but they also want to have a tangible impact. They know that you got to put something that's substance together to make it work. And it may have started in a butcher shop or started as a little craft mill, but they quickly realized that this isn't just about craft production. This is about changing the paradigm of food supply in the country.
I wonder how this interacts with the other challenge we hear on the finance side, or in agriculture, which is the land finance component. And it doesn't, none of the investments you've talked about, and maybe this is kind of interesting because of the real estate investment background, but like so much of the land, I think the statistic is 40% of the ag land in the country is going to change hands in the next 15 years. So, that changeover of ownership and management, could be a leverage point for a transition to a more regenerative food system. How does Steward Steward's finance role and the kinds of projects you look for interact with that challenge or at all? Or
Yeah, so we absolutely finance land purchases. We finance a lot of producers buying land. We finance a lot of non-farm background producers buying ag land, which is a very challenging thing for a non-farm background producer to do. The general issue is around the cost of land and the inflated cost of land from outside purchasing and hobby farming and all of that. And there's definitely that pressure, and that makes it challenging. The more expensive a ranch becomes, the harder it becomes to make money on just cattle. But we also work with producers to come up with creative models to make the economics work. We've funded livestock producers in the Northeast who've added on-farm stay in cabins to drive some additional income, and found with the agritourism, by being proximate to Boston or New York, land prices were higher, but income opportunity was also greater because they had closer markets near them. So I tend to be of the belief that if you're just talking about growing a raw commodity and selling it, everything's unaffordable. But if you're talking about building value chains and building value throughout the whole system, I think you can make the numbers work and put the pieces together. Definitely big land holdings tend to be going to the institutional investors. There's absolute, the big Midwestern row crop, big Western ranches. So that's a more fundamental issue. And part of our model is trying to build a syndicate kind of direct relationship way that's different. In addition to our lending to Old Salt, where we've got hundreds of lenders on our platform that are participating in our loans, they've also raised money from about 60 investors in the equity for that business as they've built that regional network and kind of word of mouth referral. And so instead of having to take on that kind of expensive institutional money that would require them not to own it or have to sell it in the future, they've been able to build that more permanent, flexible capital. So I think that's the general model that's new. We need more participation in agriculture, more investment that's not coming from institutional sources. It was really reading Wendell Berry on Something of America that motivated me to begin Steward, and a quote he had about needing more connection and investment from people into the land and to rebuild those links. Unfortunately, a lot of the money that's buying the ag land is the same type of money I mentioned before, where it's actually aggregated retail money. It's a pension fund capital. And so it really matters that the money that's undermining the whole system is actually people's money, that if they could be more active with it and take it out of that system and put it to places they believed in, it would then have the adverse effect. And so that's probably one of the motivating factors for Steward, is to give people agency over their capital, to give them the discretion and choice of where they're going to put it, and to put it places that are meaningful to them, that they can see the tangible impact that they've decided to do. And so I think that it requires a full rebuilding of the financial model and the incentive system to change that. Right now, it pays to just buy farmland and sit on it and earn money, and there's no disincentives for that. And there's a lot of powerful people and a lot of powerful organizations that are doing that. But buying land and sitting on it is not regenerative, is not impactful, is not dynamic. And Steward from the beginning has been about producer-centric models. So we fund producers to buy land or make investments on the farm or fund equipment. We don't take an ownership stake in their business. We're not owning the land. Like it's for the producers. Often I see models where it's meant to be producer centric, but the buyer owns the land and maybe they lease, maybe they manage it for them. But at the end of the day, it's still in the hands of a institutional group. And I think that's a model we're trying to avoid. But yes, the pressure is enormous and the prices keep going up. And ultimately, a lot of it's driven by the subsidy market and the policy market.
Thanks, Dan. That really helped me understand that connection and the difference between the producer-centric and the sort of land investment-centric model of financing regenerative agriculture that you guys are embodying. So finally, our organization's tagline, Western Landowners Alliance tagline, is stewardship with vision. And this podcast is billed as the voice of stewardship in the American West. And so we ask this question of every guest, whether they run a company called Steward or not. Could you tell me what does stewardship mean to you?
I love the question. I think normally the term steward is misunderstood, but obviously you all know it really well. And that was very actively chosen as the name of the business. That was since the second I thought of the original idea and the need to make those links, the idea of steward came to mind, because it's about thinking beyond your own lifetime in a generational capacity around the health of not just the humans, but the land and the whole system. And is it moving in a positive direction? With 30 to 50 years down the road, is it going to be healthier than it is now? Are you going to pass it on to the next generation? Those should be fundamental principles in any culture. I would argue that for any culture to exist for the long term, they have to be re-embedded or remain in the culture. But nowadays, that's not the perspective. But that's really what anchors the producers and the people we work with, is that commitment to the land, the commitment to the community around it, the long-term commitment to their health, and everyone's connected to it. For me, growing up, it was the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and that was really what drove the creation of Steward, of the largest estuary in North America, a beautiful body of water, amazing habitat for shellfish, but had just been degraded and destroyed by dredging. So all the natural oyster reefs and clam beds were dredged, the seagrasses were all dredged. Then it also became the largest production area for broiler chickens in the country. They created the model, and then the model ate them up, which led to, incredible nitrogen runoff and algal blooms and deterioration of the bay. And then you also had the Washington, D.C. and Baltimore on the same tributary rivers to that water, the bay, and the runoff from development, unconsidered development, is the same thing. And so it's such a magnificent part of the world, and one my family's been connected to for a long time. And so growing up, we would always hear "Save the Bay." During school, they'd take us out there, and it's like, okay, so there's an ecological imbalance. Something's wrong. Save the bay. So something must need saving. Well, how do we actually do that? And that was really never connected. It was like, okay, yeah, maybe there's small things to do, but what can we fundamentally do to make a difference, not just as a donation, but as like a long-term difference in a model? And so Steward was created out of the idea of how do we build an agricultural model where ecosystem health is primary, is fundamental, and then work around that. And it was very close to home with the Chesapeake Bay for me in the Eastern Shore of Maryland. But as I now am working around the country and around the world very shortly with some international projects, you see that same connection to place. You see it with coal in the Blackfoot Valley or in the Skagit Valley with Kevin Morse or these other producers in their watershed, in their region, seeing the ecological challenges, noticing the imbalance, and trying to figure out how to kickstart that cycle, which is why I feel so intimately connected and so quickly connected with these people, because it's the same fight. It's the same challenge everyone has. It's just a different piece of land, or it's in the mountains as opposed to by the coast. But it's the same challenge: ecological degradation, destruction of the rural communities, lack of health and nutrition, just incredible amount of negative impacts altogether. And how do we, from the ground up, build a model of beneficial symbiotic outcomes? And that begins with stewardship. Luckily, I find that value is deep within a lot of people. It doesn't exist in the broader financial system and economy we have built, but from a human level, it's there. And so that's what we try to tap in from people we work with, and the funding that we raise is telling that human story, telling the impact, showing the connection, and then also providing a return, also providing an incentive for people to do it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks so much for joining me, and we will share with our listeners and readers of On Land how to get in touch with Steward if they're entrepreneurs in the regenerative agriculture space. Hearing about this as an opportunity, and then also direct people who are interested in putting their money into this as eaters, as members of a community, and doing their own part to build that stewardship economy that we're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, and anybody can go to our website is gosteward.com, GOSTEWARD.com, and they can send me an email as well, dan@gosteward.com. I will reply and review an email from whoever, producer, funder, whatever it takes. And I think that's been key to our model, is people want to get engaged, people want to get involved. So figure out how to get the resources on the table, figure out how to get the projects onboarded. But it's really a human-driven model, and word of mouth and direct referrals is how it's grown.
Right on. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks so much.
Thanks again to Dan Miller for joining us today. You can learn more about Steward at the link in our show notes, which you can find by heading over to onland.link/podcast. On Land is a production of Western Landowners Alliance, a West-wide organization of landowners, natural resource managers, and partners dedicated to keeping working lands whole and healthy for the benefit of people and wildlife. This episode was hosted by Lewis Wirtz and produced by Zach Altman. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It really does help us reach more people. Your support helps us amplify the voices of stewardship in the American West. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.